The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Clarence House as King Charles III prepared for another day of royal duties. The autumn air carried a crisp freshness that reminded him of his childhood mornings at Balmoral. He adjusted his tie in the ornate mirror, thinking about the busy schedule ahead. State meetings, charity events, and the endless paperwork that came with being monarch filled his thoughts. As he walked down the grand hallway, the sound of his polished shoes echoed against the marble floors. The walls were lined with portraits of his ancestors, their stern faces watching over the palace corridors. Charles had grown accustomed to their silent presence over the decades, but today something felt different. There was an unusual energy in the air, a sense that change was coming. Queen Camilla was already in the breakfast room, seated at the long mahogany table that had hosted countless royal meals. She wore an elegant cream-colored dress that complemented her silver hair, styled perfectly as always. The morning light caught something around her neck that made Charles pause in the doorway. It was a necklace he had never seen before, yet something about it seemed strangely familiar. The piece was extraordinary, featuring deep blue sapphires surrounded by brilliant diamonds in an intricate Victorian setting. Each stone seemed to capture and reflect the sunlight, creating a mesmerizing display of color and light. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of a master jeweler from a bygone era. Charles found himself staring, trying to place where he might have seen such a remarkable piece. Camilla looked up from her morning tea and smiled warmly at her husband. She had always been his anchor, providing stability and comfort during the most challenging periods of his life. Her presence had transformed the palace from a cold, formal residence into something that felt more like home. Yet as she turned her head, the necklace caught the light again, and Charles felt a strange chill run down his spine. The breakfast proceeded as usual, with discussions about the day's engagements and upcoming royal functions. Charles tried to focus on the conversation, but his eyes kept drifting back to the necklace. There was something about the way the sapphires were cut, the particular shade of blue, and the ornate setting that triggered memories he couldn't quite access. It was like trying to remember a dream that fades upon waking. Staff members moved quietly around the room, serving fresh fruit, pastries, and the perfectly brewed Earl Grey tea that Charles preferred. The familiar routine should have been comforting, but today it felt somehow different. The palace staff, who had worked there for years, also seemed to notice the new piece of jewelry. Charles caught subtle glances and whispered exchanges between the footman and maids. As Camilla reached for her teacup, the necklace moved with her, the sapphires catching the morning light once more. Charles found himself studying every detail of the piece, from the delicate gold chain to the way each diamond was set to maximize its brilliance. The more he looked, the more certain he became that this was not just any necklace. This was something special, something with history and significance that went beyond mere decoration. The feeling of familiarity grew stronger with each passing moment. Charles had spent his entire life surrounded by the crown jewels and the royal collection, one of the most extensive and valuable assemblages of precious objects in the world. He knew every major piece, every significant historical artifact that belonged to the monarchy. Yet this necklace, this stunning creation that adorned his wife's neck, was completely unknown to him. After breakfast, as they prepared to go their separate ways for the morning's duties, Charles finally found his voice. He complimented Camilla on the beautiful necklace, asking casually where she had acquired such an exquisite piece. Her response was vague, mentioning that it had been a gift from someone who wished to remain anonymous. The explanation felt incomplete, leaving Charles with more questions than answers. Throughout his morning meetings with government officials and charitable organizations, Charles found his mind wandering back to the necklace. During a particularly dry discussion about agricultural policy, he caught himself sketching the intricate pattern of the sapphires on the margin of his notepad. The image seemed to flow from his pen without conscious thought, as if his hand remembered what his mind could not quite grasp. The mystery of the necklace began to consume his thoughts. As someone who had dedicated his life to preserving British heritage and history, Charles understood the importance of provenance and authenticity. Every piece in the royal collection had a story, a documented history that connected it to the monarchy's past. This necklace, beautiful as it was, existed outside of that carefully maintained record. By midday, Charles had made a decision. He would need to investigate this mysterious piece more thoroughly. The responsible thing to do would be to have it properly appraised and documented, to understand its origins and ensure that it belonged legitimately in the royal collection. Little did he know that this investigation would uncover secrets that would shake the very foundations of everything he thought he knew about his family's treasured possessions. Charles spent the afternoon in his private study, surrounded by leather-bound books and historical documents. The room smelled of old paper and polished wood, a comforting scent that usually helped him think clearly. But today his mind was restless. He pulled out several reference books about royal jewelry, hoping to find some clue about the mysterious necklace that had captured his attention. The palace library contained one of the most comprehensive collections of information about British royal treasures. Charles flipped through pages of photographs and detailed descriptions, comparing each image to his memory of the necklace Camilla had worn. Hours passed as he searched through catalogs of crown jewels, ceremonial pieces, and personal collections that had belonged to various members of the royal family throughout history. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Charles made an interesting discovery. In a dusty volume about Queen Victoria's personal jewelry collection, he found a description that made his heart race. The book mentioned a sapphire necklace that had disappeared during World War II, when many royal treasures were hidden away for safekeeping. The description matched perfectly with what he had seen around Camilla's neck that morning. According to the historical record, the necklace had been commissioned by Prince Albert as a gift for Queen Victoria on their 10th wedding anniversary. The piece featured rare cashmere sapphires, known for their exceptional deep blue color and remarkable clarity. Each stone had been personally selected by Prince Albert, who had spent months working with the royal jeweler to create something truly extraordinary for his beloved wife. The more Charles read, the more troubled he became. The necklace had reportedly been lost when a convoy transporting royal treasures to a secret location had been attacked during an air raid in 1941. Several priceless pieces had vanished that night, including this particular necklace, which had been one of Queen Victoria's most cherished possessions. The official records stated that these items had never been recovered. Charles felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. If this was indeed the same necklace, then how had it come into Camilla's possession? The implications were staggering. Either the historical records were wrong, or someone had been hiding the truth about these missing treasures for over 80 years. The thought that the necklace might have been stolen or acquired through questionable means made Charles feel physically ill. He decided to call Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, the royal jeweler who had served the family for 3 decades. Sir Geoffrey was not only an expert in precious stones and historical jewelry, but also a trusted confidant who had helped authenticate countless pieces in the royal collection. If anyone could provide answers about this mysterious necklace, it would be him. The phone conversation was brief but alarming. Sir Geoffrey immediately recognized the description of the necklace and confirmed Charles's worst fears. He had seen this exact piece before, not around the neck of any royal family member, but in a private auction catalog that had crossed his desk several months earlier. The necklace had been sold by a prestigious auction house to an anonymous buyer for an astronomical sum. The revelation hit Charles like a physical blow. Someone had purchased what appeared to be a lost royal treasure and somehow arranged for it to reach Camilla. The anonymous gift story suddenly took on a much more sinister tone. Who would spend millions of pounds on a stolen royal artifact and then give it away as a present? And why would they choose Camilla as the recipient? Charles's mind raced through the possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Could this be some kind of elaborate scheme to embarrass the royal family? Was someone trying to expose security flaws in the protection of royal treasures? Or worse, was this part of a larger conspiracy involving stolen artifacts from the royal collection? The king realized he needed to handle this situation with extreme care. Any public scandal involving stolen royal jewels could damage the monarchy's reputation irreparably. The press would have a field day with such a story, and the political ramifications could be severe. Yet he could not simply ignore what he had discovered. The truth had to be uncovered, regardless of how uncomfortable it might be. As evening approached, Charles made the difficult decision to confront Camilla directly. He needed to know exactly how she had received the necklace and from whom. The conversation would be awkward and potentially damaging to their relationship, but there was no alternative. The integrity of the crown was at stake, and as monarch, he had a duty to protect the institution above all else. He found Camilla in her sitting room, reading by the firelight. She had changed into a comfortable evening gown, and thankfully the mysterious necklace was no longer around her neck. Charles sat down across from her, trying to find the right words to begin what might be the most difficult conversation of their marriage. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the London evening was quiet, with only the distant sound of traffic breaking the silence. Charles looked at his wife, this woman who had stood by him through so many challenges, and wondered how their relationship would survive what he was about to reveal. Camilla sensed the tension immediately. She set down her book and looked at Charles with concern, asking if everything was all right. Her genuine worry and affection made what he had to do even more difficult. Charles took a deep breath and began to explain what he had discovered about the necklace, watching as her expression changed from confusion to shock to something that looked very much like fear. Camilla's face went pale as Charles explained his discovery about the necklace. She listened in stunned silence as he detailed his research, the historical records, and the conversation with Sir Geoffrey. When he finished speaking, the room fell into an uncomfortable quiet that seemed to stretch on forever. The only sound was the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Finally, Camilla spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. She admitted that she had suspected something was unusual about the necklace from the moment she received it. The anonymous gift had arrived with a simple note stating that it belonged with the royal family and should be worn by the Queen. There had been no return address, no identifying marks, nothing that could trace the sender. Charles felt a mixture of relief and concern as Camilla continued her explanation. She revealed that the package had been delivered directly to her private secretary, bypassing the usual security protocols that screened all gifts to the royal family. This detail alarmed Charles even more than the mysterious origins of the necklace itself. How had someone managed to circumvent the extensive security measures that protected the royal household? Camilla explained that she had initially been hesitant to wear the piece, but her secretary had assured her that all proper security checks had been completed. The necklace had been examined for dangerous devices, and nothing suspicious had been found. However, no one had thought to verify its historical significance or check whether it might be a stolen artifact. The security team had been focused on physical threats, not the possibility of receiving stolen royal treasures. As they talked, Charles began to piece together a timeline of events. The necklace had been sold at auction 3 months earlier, according to Sir Geoffrey's information. It had arrived at the palace just 2 weeks ago, which meant someone had purchased it with the specific intention of giving it to Camilla. This was not a random act or a coincidence. It was a carefully planned operation. The implications became more serious as Charles considered the potential motivations behind such an elaborate scheme. Someone with substantial financial resources had orchestrated this entire situation. They had tracked down a lost royal artifact, purchased it for millions of pounds, and then arranged for its delivery to the Queen. The question was whether this was meant as a genuine gesture of goodwill or something more sinister. Charles decided to call an emergency meeting with his most trusted advisors. The head of royal security, the private secretary, and the keeper of the royal collection were summoned to a private conference room. The meeting was scheduled for later that evening after the regular palace staff had gone home. The fewer people who knew about this situation, the better. While they waited for the meeting time to arrive, Charles and Camilla continued to discuss the necklace and its possible origins. Camilla mentioned that she had felt uncomfortable wearing it from the beginning, describing a strange sensation that the piece somehow did not belong to her. She had attributed this feeling to the necklace's obvious value and historical significance, but now wondered if her instincts had been trying to warn her about something The evening meeting was held in the secure conference room used for the most sensitive royal business. The room was swept for electronic surveillance devices before each use, ensuring complete privacy for their discussions. Charles began by swearing everyone to absolute secrecy before explaining the situation in detail. The reactions around the table ranged from shock to anger to deep concern about the potential consequences. Sir Malcolm Pemberton, the head of royal security, was particularly disturbed by the news. He immediately began questioning how such a breach of protocol had occurred. His team prided themselves on maintaining the highest standards of security, and this incident represented a serious failure in their procedures. The fact that someone had managed to deliver a stolen royal artifact directly to the Queen was a nightmare scenario for his department. The keeper of the royal collection, Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, provided additional historical context about the missing necklace. She confirmed that it had indeed belonged to Queen Victoria and had been lost during World War II under mysterious circumstances. The piece had been considered one of the most significant losses from the royal collection, both for its monetary value and its sentimental importance to the royal family. As the meeting progressed, several disturbing possibilities emerged. The theft of the necklace during wartime might not have been the random crime it had appeared to be. Someone with inside knowledge of the convoy routes and security procedures could have orchestrated the disappearance. Even more troubling was the possibility that the necklace had been in private hands for decades, passed down through generations of people who knew exactly what they possessed. The decision was made to launch a discreet investigation into the necklace's recent history. Sir Geoffrey would be asked to contact the auction house and try to learn more about the seller and the sale. Meanwhile, Dr. Thornton would review all historical records related to the wartime losses, looking for any clues that might have been overlooked in previous investigations. Charles insisted that the investigation be conducted with absolute discretion. Any leak to the media would create a scandal that could damage the monarchy's reputation and potentially compromise their ability to recover other missing artifacts. The team agreed to report their findings only to Charles and to take all necessary precautions to maintain secrecy. As the meeting concluded, Charles felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. This situation had the potential to become one of the most serious challenges of his reign. The discovery of the necklace raised questions about the security of the royal collection, the effectiveness of palace protocols, and the possibility that other stolen artifacts might be circulating in private collections around the world, returning to their private quarters. Charles and Camilla found themselves facing an uncertain future. The necklace, which had seemed like such a beautiful gift that morning, now sat in a secure safe, locked away like evidence in a criminal investigation. Neither of them could have imagined that such an elegant piece of jewelry would become the center of a mystery that threatened to expose secrets buried for over 80 years. 3 days after the emergency meeting, Sir Geoffrey returned with information that shocked everyone involved in the investigation. The auction house had been surprisingly cooperative, perhaps motivated by the gravity of the situation and their desire to avoid any scandal. The records revealed that the necklace had been consigned by a seller, using the name Estate of Margaret Whitmore, but further investigation showed that no such person had ever existed. The false identity had been carefully constructed, with forged documents dating back several decades. Someone had invested considerable time and resources into creating a believable backstory for the necklace's provenance. This level of sophistication suggested that they were dealing with professional art thieves or possibly an international smuggling operation that specialized in stolen historical artifacts. Dr. Thornton's research into the wartime records had uncovered equally disturbing information. She discovered that the convoy carrying the royal treasures had been attacked at a location that was supposedly known only to a handful of high-ranking officials. The precision of the attack and the specific targeting of certain vehicles suggested that the thieves had inside information about the convoy's route and cargo. Even more troubling was the discovery that several other pieces supposedly lost in the same incident had surfaced in private collections over the years. Each had appeared with carefully fabricated provenance documents, and all had been sold through different auction houses across Europe. The pattern suggested a coordinated effort to gradually release the stolen artifacts into the legitimate art market. Charles felt a growing sense of unease as he reviewed the investigation reports. The scope of the theft was much larger than anyone had previously imagined, and the sophistication of the operation indicated that they were dealing with people who had extensive knowledge of both the art world and royal protocol. The fact that someone had managed to place the necklace directly into Camilla's hands demonstrated a level of access and planning that was deeply unsettling. The king decided to expand the investigation, bringing in Scotland Yard's art crime team to assist with the case. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in high-value art theft, was briefed on the situation under strict conditions of confidentiality. Her expertise in tracking stolen artifacts and her connections within the international art community would be invaluable in uncovering the truth. Inspector Mitchell's initial assessment was sobering. She explained that stolen royal artifacts were among the most difficult items to fence, because they were so well documented and recognizable. The fact that someone had managed to successfully sell multiple pieces from the royal collection suggested that they had connections to corrupt dealers, unscrupulous collectors, and possibly even museum officials who were willing to overlook questionable provenance. The investigation team discovered that the auction house sale had been just one link in a complex chain of transactions. The necklace had passed through several intermediaries before reaching its final buyer, making it nearly impossible to trace back to its original source. Each transaction had been carefully structured to obscure the trail and protect the identities of those involved. Meanwhile, Palace Security conducted a thorough review of their procedures, trying to understand how the necklace had been delivered to Camilla without proper verification. They discovered that the delivery had coincided with a period when several regular staff members were on vacation and temporary personnel were handling routine deliveries. The timing appeared to be more than coincidental. The investigation revealed that someone had been monitoring palace routines for months, possibly years. They had identified weaknesses in the security protocols and had waited for the perfect opportunity to exploit them. The level of surveillance required for such detailed knowledge of palace operations suggested that the perpetrators had significant resources and possibly professional intelligence training. As the investigation deepened, Charles began to suspect that the return of the necklace might be connected to some larger political or personal agenda. The timing of the delivery, just as his reign was becoming more established, seemed designed to create maximum impact. Someone wanted him to find the necklace and discover its history, but their ultimate motivation remained unclear. Dr. Thornton made another disturbing discovery while reviewing insurance records from the wartime period. The missing artifacts had been insured for astronomical sums, and the insurance companies had paid out substantial claims when they were declared lost. If the pieces were now being recovered, it could trigger complex legal battles over ownership rights and insurance fraud investigations. The financial implications were staggering. If multiple stolen artifacts were recovered, the royal family might face demands for the return of insurance payouts from decades earlier, adjusted for inflation and interest. The legal complexities alone could take years to resolve and would inevitably attract unwanted media attention to the entire affair. Charles realized that he was facing a situation that could potentially destabilize his reign and damage the monarchy's reputation for generations. The thieves had not just stolen jewelry. They had created a time bomb that was now exploding in the most public way possible. Every decision he made from this point forward would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. The investigation team prepared to take their findings to the next level, reaching out to international law enforcement agencies and art recovery specialists. The case was evolving from a simple theft investigation into a complex international conspiracy that touched on issues of wartime crimes, art smuggling, and possibly even state-sponsored espionage. As Charles prepared for bed that evening, He reflected on how a single piece of jewelry had managed to unravel so many carefully buried secrets. The necklace sat in its secure location, a beautiful but dangerous reminder that the past was never truly buried. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, and he could only hope that his monarchy would survive whatever truths were about to be exposed. A week into the investigation, Inspector Mitchell made a breakthrough that changed everything. Through her connections with international art recovery networks, she had traced several other pieces from the wartime theft to private collections owned by a single mysterious collector. The collector operated through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts, making their true identity nearly impossible to determine through conventional means. What made this discovery particularly intriguing was that the collector had been systematically acquiring not just any stolen royal artifacts, but specifically pieces that had belonged to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. It was as if someone was attempting to reassemble Victoria's personal jewelry collection. Piece by piece, regardless of the cost or legal complications involved, Charles found this revelation deeply unsettling. Queen Victoria had been his great-great-grandmother, and her jewelry collection had special significance to the royal family. The pieces were not just valuable artifacts. They were intimate personal possessions that connected the current monarchy to its Victorian roots. Someone was deliberately targeting these specific items, which suggested a personal rather than purely financial motivation. The investigation team decided to set up a carefully orchestrated operation to draw out the mysterious collector. They would use the fact that the necklace was now in royal hands as bait, hoping that the collector would make contact to either reclaim the piece or negotiate some kind of exchange. It was a risky strategy that could potentially expose the royal family to blackmail or other threats. Meanwhile, Charles had been struggling with whether to inform other members of the royal family about the situation. The discovery of stolen artifacts raised questions about the authenticity and provenance of many pieces in the royal collection. If word leaked to other family members, there was a risk that the information would eventually reach the media through careless conversation or deliberate disclosure. Dr. Thornton continued her painstaking research through historical records, and she made another startling discovery. Among the papers in the royal archives, she found evidence that Queen Victoria herself had suspected that some of her jewelry might have been copied or replaced. Several diary entries from the late 1800s mentioned her concerns about the security of her personal collection and her suspicions about certain courtiers who had access to her private quarters. This historical revelation added a new dimension to the current crisis. If Queen Victoria's jewelry had been compromised more than a century ago, then the wartime theft might have been just one incident in a much longer pattern of criminal activity targeting the royal collection. The implications for the authenticity of other pieces in the collection were staggering. Charles authorized Dr. Thornton to conduct discreet examinations of other pieces in the collection that had belonged to Queen Victoria. Using modern forensic techniques and detailed historical records, she began the delicate process of determining which pieces were authentic and which might be sophisticated copies or replacements. The work had to be done in absolute secrecy to avoid panic or premature disclosure. 3 days later, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Camilla received another anonymous package. This time, however, the delivery was intercepted by palace security before it reached her. The package contained a single sheet of expensive writing paper with an elegant, handwritten message that made Charles's blood run cold. The note was brief but chilling. Your Majesty appreciates beautiful jewelry, but she should be more careful about what belongs to whom. Some gifts come with prices that cannot be paid in money. The return of Victoria's treasures is just the beginning of a longer conversation that we must have. The message was signed with a simple initial debut and included a phone number with instructions to call at precisely 8 o'clock that evening. The paper was of the highest quality, and the handwriting appeared to be that of someone with classical education and refined tastes. This was not the work of common criminals. Someone with sophisticated knowledge and substantial resources was orchestrating these events. Charles and his security team spent hours analyzing the note, trying to extract every possible clue about its author. The paper could be traced to an exclusive stationer in Paris, but such establishments served wealthy clients from around the world and maintained strict confidentiality about their customers. The phone number had been registered to a corporate entity that existed only on paper, with no real address or identifiable owners. As 8 o'clock approached, Charles faced one of the most difficult decisions of his reign. Should he take the call and risk walking into some kind of trap? Or should he ignore the message and potentially miss the opportunity to resolve the crisis? His security advisors were strongly opposed to any direct contact. But Charles felt that he had no choice but to hear what the mysterious who had to say. The decision was made to have the call traced while recording everything for later analysis. Charles would take the call from a secure location while his security team monitored every aspect of the conversation. If the caller made any threats or demands, the call would be immediately terminated and law enforcement would take over the case. At exactly 8 o'clock, Charles dialed the number with trembling fingers. The phone rang twice before being answered by a cultured voice with a slight European accent. The caller addressed him respectfully but firmly, making it clear that they knew exactly who they were speaking with and what power they held over the situation. The conversation that followed would change Charles's understanding of his family's history and force him to confront secrets that had been buried for more than 80 years. The mysterious caller was about to reveal truths that would shake the very foundations of everything Charles thought he knew about the royal collection and the wartime losses that had haunted the monarchy for decades. As Charles listened to the voice on the other end of the line, he realized that he was not just dealing with a simple case of art theft. He was about to become entangled in a web of historical secrets, family mysteries, and political intrigue that stretched back through generations of his own family. The voice on the phone belonged to someone who called himself Wolfgang Albrecht, and he spoke with the confidence of someone who held all the cards in a very dangerous game. He explained to Charles that he was not a thief or a criminal in the conventional sense, but rather the guardian of a family legacy that had been stolen from his ancestors during World War II. The revelation that followed would challenge everything Charles thought he knew about his family's history. Wolfgang explained that his great-grandfather had been a German nobleman who had served as a trusted advisor to Queen Victoria during the later years of her reign. The family had been responsible for maintaining and cataloging many of Victoria's personal possessions, including her extensive jewelry collection. When World War I broke out, anti-German sentiment in Britain had forced the family to flee, leaving behind many of their own possessions and detailed records of the royal collection. According to Wolfgang, his family had maintained meticulous records of every piece in Victoria's collection, including detailed photographs, measurements, and documentation of any repairs or modifications made over the years. During World War II, his grandfather had approached the British government with an offer to help protect the royal treasures by providing safe storage in neutral Switzerland. The offer had been secretly accepted, but something had gone terribly wrong during the transfer. The convoy that had supposedly been attacked by thieves had actually been hijacked by corrupt officials who had planned to steal the artifacts and blame the theft on enemy action. Wolfgang's grandfather had been murdered when he tried to stop the theft, and his family had spent the following decades tracking down the stolen pieces and gathering evidence of the conspiracy that had cost him his life. Charles listened in stunned silence as Wolfgang provided details that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of the wartime operations and the royal collection. The caller described specific pieces that had never been publicly documented, explained the security procedures that had been in place during the transfers, and even mentioned the names of officials who had been involved in the operation. Wolfgang's motivation for returning the necklace now became clear. He was not interested in money or revenge against the current royal family. Instead, he wanted acknowledgement of his family's sacrifice and official recognition of their role in trying to protect the royal treasures. More importantly, he wanted help in recovering the remaining stolen pieces and bringing the descendants of the original conspirators to justice. The conversation revealed that Wolfgang had been systematically tracking down and purchasing stolen royal artifacts for over 30 years, using his family's inherited wealth and business connections. Each acquisition had been carefully planned and executed to avoid drawing attention to his activities. The goal was to eventually return all the pieces to the royal collection, but only after the truth about the wartime conspiracy had been officially acknowledged. Charles found himself in an impossible position. Wolfgang's story, if true, meant that his own family had been the victims of a massive conspiracy that had been covered up for over 80 years. Government officials, possibly including members of his own ancestors' inner circle, had orchestrated the theft and murder of the very people who were trying to help them. The implications for the monarchy's reputation and its relationship with the British government were enormous. Wolfgang offered to provide Charles with copies of all his family's documentation, including photographs of the original collection, correspondence with British officials, and evidence of the cover-up that had followed the theft. In exchange, he wanted a private meeting with Charles to discuss the return of the remaining artifacts and the possibility of some form of official recognition for his family's sacrifice. The security implications of such a meeting were staggering. Charles would be placing himself at the mercy of someone who had demonstrated the ability to penetrate palace security and manipulate events from the shadows. Yet the potential benefits of resolving the crisis and recovering the stolen artifacts were equally compelling. After the phone call ended, Charles met with his security team and closest advisors to discuss Wolfgang's proposal. The consensus was that the story was too detailed and specific to be a complete fabrication, but that did not necessarily make Wolfgang trustworthy. He could be telling a partial truth while concealing his real motivations. Or he could be working with others who had their own agenda for disrupting the monarchy. Dr. Thornton was asked to verify as many of Wolfgang's claims as possible using the royal archives and other historical sources. Her preliminary research confirmed several details about the German noble family and their connection to Queen Victoria's court. The family had indeed fled Britain during World War I, and there were records of their involvement with the royal collection dating back to the 1890s. Inspector Mitchell's investigation into Wolfgang's background revealed a complex picture of a wealthy businessman with legitimate interests in art, collecting, and historical preservation. His companies had been involved in several high-profile art recovery operations, and he had worked with legitimate museums and collectors to return stolen artifacts to their rightful owners. However, the investigation also revealed connections to shadowy figures in the international art world who operated on the margins of legality. As Charles weighed his options, he realized that he was faced with a choice that would define his reign and potentially reshape the monarchy's relationship with its own history. He could choose the safe path and involve law enforcement in a criminal investigation that might recover some artifacts, but would almost certainly result in damaging publicity and unresolved questions about the wartime conspiracy. Alternatively, he could take the risky step of meeting with Wolfgang and attempting to negotiate a resolution that would recover the stolen artifacts while keeping the most damaging secrets buried. The decision would require him to balance his duty to protect the monarchy against his responsibility to seek justice for crimes committed in his family's name. The weight of history pressed down on Charles as he contemplated the implications of each choice. Whatever decision he made would have consequences that would echo through future generations of the royal family and potentially change the way the British public viewed the monarchy forever. After 3 sleepless nights of deliberation, Charles made the decision that would determine the outcome of the crisis. He would meet with Wolfgang Albrecht, but under carefully controlled conditions that would minimize the security risks, while maximizing the potential for resolving the situation. The meeting would take place at Windsor Castle, on royal territory where security could be absolutely guaranteed, and would be attended by only the most trusted members of his inner circle. Dr. Thornton's research had confirmed many of Wolfgang's claims about his family's historical connection to the royal collection. The archives contained extensive correspondence between Wolfgang's great-grandfather and Queen Victoria's private secretary, detailing the family's role in maintaining and protecting the royal treasures. More importantly, she had found evidence of a secret agreement signed in 1940 that authorized Wolfgang's grandfather to arrange safekeeping for selected royal artifacts in neutral territory. The meeting took place on a gray autumn morning in the private apartments of Windsor Castle. Wolfgang Albrecht arrived accompanied only by a single assistant, who carried a leather briefcase containing the promised documentation. He was a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to moving in elite circles. His manner was respectful but confident, and Charles could see intelligence and determination in his eyes. Wolfgang began the meeting by presenting a thick folder of documents that told the complete story of his family's involvement with the royal collection. The materials included original letters from Queen Victoria, photographs of jewelry pieces taken during routine maintenance, and detailed inventories that had been prepared for the wartime protection program. The documentation was so comprehensive and authentic that it left no doubt about the legitimacy of his claims. The most shocking revelation came when Wolfgang presented evidence of the conspiracy that had led to his grandfather's death. Government documents, obtained through decades of careful investigation, showed that corrupt officials had indeed planned to steal the royal artifacts and had murdered Wolfgang's grandfather when he discovered their scheme. The cover-up that followed had involved high-ranking members of the wartime government who had fabricated the story about the convoy attack to hide their own crimes. Charles listened in growing amazement as Wolfgang explained how his family had spent 80 years gathering evidence and tracking down the stolen artifacts. They had used their wealth and connections to purchase pieces whenever they appeared at auctions, always with the intention of eventually returning them to the royal collection. The operation had required patience, discretion, and enormous financial resources, but they had never wavered from their ultimate goal. Wolfgang revealed that he had recovered not just the sapphire necklace, but 17 other pieces from Queen Victoria's collection. Each item had been carefully authenticated and was now stored in a secure facility in Switzerland, waiting for the right moment to be returned to its rightful home. The total value of the recovered artifacts was estimated to be well over £50 million, representing one of the largest art recovery operations in history. The proposal that Wolfgang presented was both generous and challenging. He would return all the recovered artifacts to the royal collection without compensation, asking only for official acknowledgement of his family's sacrifice and their role in protecting the royal treasures. However, he also wanted the British government to formally investigate the wartime conspiracy and provide some measure of justice for his grandfather's murder. Charles found himself deeply moved by Wolfgang's story and impressed by his family's dedication to preserving the royal heritage. The decision to return the artifacts without demanding compensation demonstrated a level of integrity that was rare in the art world. However, the request for an official investigation posed significant political risks that could embarrass the government and potentially damage the monarchy's relationship with Parliament. After hours of discussion, Charles and Wolfgang reached an agreement that balanced the various competing interests. The artifacts would be quietly returned to the royal collection over a period of several months, with each piece being officially discovered during routine conservation work. This would allow the royal family to recover their heritage without creating a public scandal about the original theft. In exchange, Charles agreed to work with government officials to arrange for a private acknowledgement of Wolfgang's family's service to the crown. A formal investigation of the wartime conspiracy would be conducted discreetly by intelligence services, with the understanding that any findings would be classified for national security reasons. Wolfgang's grandfather would be posthumously recognized for his sacrifice. Though the details would remain confidential, the meeting concluded with Wolfgang presenting Charles with the sapphire necklace that had started the entire adventure. As he placed it in Charles's hands, Wolfgang explained that his grandmother had always said the necklace belonged with the royal family, and that wearing it would bring good fortune to the monarchy. The irony was not lost on Charles that a piece of jewelry had nearly caused a scandal but had ultimately led to the recovery of an irreplaceable part of his family's heritage. Over the following months, the remaining artifacts were quietly integrated back into the royal collection. Each piece was examined by Dr. Thornton and other experts, who confirmed their authenticity and documented their history for future generations. The royal inventory was updated to reflect the return of the lost treasures, though the full story of their recovery remained known only to a select few. Charles occasionally thought about the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with Camilla wearing an unusual necklace to breakfast. The mystery had revealed hidden chapters in his family's history and had led to the recovery of priceless artifacts that might otherwise have been lost forever. More importantly, it had demonstrated that sometimes the most valuable treasures are not the objects themselves, but the stories of the people who sacrifice everything to protect them. The sapphire necklace now rested safely in the royal collection, where it belonged. Charles had decided that it would eventually be worn again at state occasions, carrying with it the memory of Queen Victoria's love for Prince Albert and the dedication of the Albrecht family to preserving royal history. Sometimes, he reflected, the most beautiful endings come from the most unexpected beginnings.